This is The Balance Dilemma. We tackle the often uniquely, but not always, female dilemma, managing life, work, family, and self. I'm Maura Carlin.
And I'm Christy Derrico. At The Balance Dilemma, we speak with women and men to hear their balanced stories. Our guests are entrepreneurs, reinventors, creators, executives, parents, and partners, telling us what we really want to know. How the heck did they manage that? And can you have it all and all at the same time?
Our guest is Lynne Greene, the former global group president of Estée Lauder Companies. After a 45-year career in beauty, making it to the C-suite, Lynne retired, or as she says, rewired, and began a new life chapter that includes marrying the love of her life at age 70. Talk about not done yet. Lynne's story is about making it in the business world while staying true to yourself, making choices, and making changes. And we can all learn a lot about life from Lynne. Welcome to The Balanced Dilemma, Lynne. We're excited to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Lynne, your story starts in what you describe a small town in rural Missouri. As an ambitious young woman, you were a first-generation college grad in the family, and you say that your mother was a housewife. How did this upbringing affect your entry and success into the professional world?
I think it was everything about my success, because my mother said to me what millions of mothers say to daughters and sons along the way. She always said, "Darling, you can do anything you want to do. You can be anything that you want to be." And so that sounds so inspirational and so lovely. But let me tell you something. There's a big obligation behind you can do anything you want to do. But I think it motivated me, and I think it made me terribly ready and ambitious to leave that rural town that I was born in.
Well, you seem to have maintained some of that pleasantness that I envision coming from Missouri, but you're going to tell us all about that.
But you did sort of start on a traditional path. You married young.
I did.
And you became a middle school teacher.
I became a middle school teacher. I married young because that's a very Midwestern thing to do. But you know what? I went through my life regretting that. I said, I can't believe I did that, because I really didn't want to do it when I did it. It was one of those things that you just push forward and you do, and then you say, why? But when I wrote the memoir that I didn't publish, I chose not to do it. I made a connection that if I hadn't done that, I wouldn't have the career that I've had for my whole life, because it was that husband who went into retailing and connected me with all of the people in the beauty industry so that started my career.
So tell us about that, because that is an interesting story.
It is very interesting. And I can't believe I didn't make that connection until I wrote it out and looked at it chronologically. He became, right after we graduated from college, he became an executive at a famous bar in St. Louis, Missouri. And there was a cosmetic buyer who loved and adored him, and she got to know me. Well, he did so well with her that he got promoted to buyer. And he goes over to Kansas City, and that's where he found his next wife. So I was like, oh my, what am I going to do now? And the buyer that had mentored him had watched me through the ending of that relationship, which actually taught me a lesson. You never know when people are watching you. And she thought that I actually made a graceful exit. And she said to the Estée Lauder people, she said, I think you should talk to her. And they talked to me, and they hired me with all of my 1 year of middle school teaching experience.
I have so many questions to ask you. How old were you when that was happening?
I would have been 23.
Oh, the ripe old age of 23. Now, just rewinding a little bit back to your teaching middle school, did you learn any skills from that job?
I certainly did. I learned something. I was thinking about it because Maura and I were having a conversation yesterday, and I started middle school, 7th, 8th grade. What a time. Both of you are mothers. You know what the 7th and 8th grade is. with.
And you survived.
I survived. But there was a teacher who'd been there a good deal older than I, because when I started, I was 22 when I was a middle school teacher. She comes and she says, let me explain something to you. You need to be very strict in the beginning. You can always be less strict, but you need to be strict in the beginning. And I go, I think she's right. I think I'll do that. And I was. And that helped, being 22 years old, because I was minutes older than these 7th and 8th graders. But then something else happened. We had the child who was the tyrant in that 7th grade class, Jack. I'll know his name for the rest of my life. Jack would never shut up. Jack would never sit in his seat. And one day I took him out in the hall and I said, you know, Jack, I really, really like you. And he changed. He changed before my very eyes. I said, I really like you, but if you continue to disrupt the class, I don't want you here. I'm just going to send you to the principal's office and leave you there. It changed him. And I said, you know, what people do is different from who they are. And sometimes just letting them know that you like them makes a difference. And you can do something for them in the process of correcting them or disciplining
But
them.
as I understand it, you learned how to control a room.
I did.
And those skills helped you when you went on to the career that we're
course.
going to hear
Yeah.
about today.
Yes, of course.
So you started in beauty out in Missouri.
Yes, St. Louis, Missouri.
And how did you find your way to New York, where you had this really big career?
I was an account executive for 2 years, and I was extremely ambitious, and I knew that I wanted to live in New York City. I knew that's what I wanted to do.
Did you know that growing up?
I think every picture I ever saw of New York City, I think I knew I wanted to be there. I can't, so yes, I think so. But once I started working, I knew so. I knew it was the only place I wanted to be. So I said, after 2 years, I said, okay, I've done a good job, haven't I? Yes. I'd like a promotion. I'd like to do the next spot. So they said, well, that's regional. Now, we had a long conversation about that, and they moved me to North Carolina. And in moving me to North Carolina, I didn't like that part of the country so much. And there was a marvelous lady that I may talk about a few times in this interview named Ida Stewart, who was the personal assistant to Mrs. Estée Lauder. And she was from Aiken, South Carolina. She met me while I was there. And the national training director's spot became available. And she came down to see me. And she said, can I do her Southern accent a little bit?
Go right
I
ahead.
think so.
I thought you might be interested in this. Do you think you might be interested in this? And I said, is it in New York City? And she said, yes. And I said, I think I might be interested in this too, Ida. So that's how I got to New
And
York.
how could you reject a question like that, said with such oozing with Southern charm? You know, did you feel that working in cosmetics, that it was a more female-friendly industry, or no?
You feel like cosmetics is a very friendly female industry until you get to the very top of it. And that's when we realized I became the first group president, female group president at the company in 2012. So but yet the company has a large percentage. I think it's still probably about 90% female. And of course, the customers are 90% female. So
And that's despite Estée Lauder herself?
that's despite Estée Lauder herself.
So you had this ambition, but what did ambition look like to you as a child growing up or as a young woman? And then when you finally made it to New York, did you have a picture or an understanding?
I didn't. I just had, I wrote about that as well in The Fire That Can't Be Extinguished. My ambition was to be out of rural America. I wanted to be in the city, and I didn't know which train or which career I was going to hop on in order to do that.
So it wasn't necessarily beauty
It was
that drove
not.
you.
No, it was not.
I'm thinking Mary Tyler Moore, right? I mean,
There you go. That's true.
Younger generations wouldn't know how much of an impact she had with her
did.
fashion, her beauty, showing that she could do it, and it was a great
She
show.
had spunk.
She had spunk.
She had a lot of spunk.
Great
fearless, fearless.
Great hair.
You kept moving up. So was that a charted path? Did someone say to you, this is how you do it? Or you said, this is what I want? How do you get there?
You always say what you want. And I always...
Can you repeat that for our audience?
Yes. You always say what you want. You always say it. It's not what you say. It's how you say it. And it's what you do about what you say, in my opinion. So I was in New York. I became the national training director. I worked with Mrs. Lauder herself at times with Ida Stewart. And then I started to think about it. And I said, if you're going to run a company, which I think I might want to do, I'm going to have to get some of those hard skills, like marketing. I'm going to have to know what marketing is all about. I'm going to have some more sales experience at an elevated level. So I said that to the people at Estée Lauder at the time. And they wanted to keep me where I was. Why? Because Mrs. Lauder knew me and worked with me. It's not a lot. She just knew me and worked with me, and Ida. So you know how sometimes you become indispensable because you're in a position that they're not sure they've got someone else can fit in that just as well. So they weren't going to move me. And I had a friend who went to Chanel, and she called me and she said, I've got a marketing job. I think you should do it. And I said, I think I should too. Well, the company was very upset with me that I left, but I said, I've been asking you to do marketing for a long while, and I need to do marketing. I'm sure that they might have looked at me like, and why do you feel you need to do marketing? That's what I determined was a necessary skill.
So you needed to step out to
Yes.
move up.
Yes.
And how long were you at Chanel?
Oh, just 2 years. And then I went back to Estée Lauder.
So I have another question I want to ask about these different titles, and there's marketing, there's sales, there's all these different things in a company that does cosmetics. Did you take classes? Did you learn from any mentors? How did you learn those skills, or was it just on the job?
It was a two learning process. I did a lot of learning myself. I read. If I didn't know how to figure out a mathematical equation, I went and got a book and I figured it out. I didn't Google it because we weren't doing that then. I went and got a book, and I figured it out. And I made myself a sponge. I watched everything. And I've been fortunate in that I'm left brain and right brain. So I can go back and forth. I can do numbers, and I can also do the creative side. So I had an advantage.
And how did you learn management? Because that's another piece of it. Although, were there mentors or teachers for that?
Not really. I think that maybe that lesson was learned that day with Jack in St. Louis, Missouri, and Kirkwood High School. That to nobody, I really never managed anybody. And I don't like that word because I feel like if you're managing them, you're trying to manage what they do and at all times. Yeah, at all times. So what I loved to do was inspire people to find themselves and do their best work. I always had a very strong opinion that if you were a leader, it was your obligation to put the right person with the right job. And when you did, it was magical. So that's, I don't know where I learned it. I don't know how I did it, but that was my philosophy.
And what time frame are we dealing with when you're rising the corporate ladder, going from Chanel and back? What time are we?
Well, all right. So 5. So we're I'm not 30 yet when I'm at Chanel, and then I come back to Estée Lauder. So it's about that time.
What's interesting is that you could take on these titles at that time without an MBA or a certification, which is such a huge part of what's required now to even be considered. And yet it's understood that you would learn on the job and osmosis and reading and everything else that you have to do to gain those skills. It's a different time.
Absolutely. And in the course of that, did you have mentors and sponsors who got you through and got you up?
Champions.
Yeah, champions. I think that's an excellent point. Let me go back to this point and then answer the mentor question. I think that it was a very different time, and you didn't have to have as many credentials. So you had to be more of a self-starter in that regard and in that period of time. And yes, I had some lovely mentors. One of them I already mentioned, and I may mention her a couple more times. Ida Stewart, who was literally she was hired. She was fired one time for making change. She had not a number skill in her head. She was just this outrageous creative, and she was marvelous to me. She didn't teach me how to put together a P&L, but and she died 2 years ago. Tomorrow she would have been 102.
Wow.
So she was a great mentor. Then you have people, but I want to talk a bit about mentors, and I'll be brief. I think that I always had the philosophy that the mentor would find me. I never went looking for a mentor. I said, here's my job. I will do it well. If they ask me to do something, I'll do more than they ask me to do. Leonard Lauder, I still consider a mentor. I had someone you and I spoke about before the show started, Pierre Rogers. So I think if you do your job and work hard, I think they find you lots of times.
Now, you were also given some advice to always say what you think, not just say what you want, say what you think. How did that work for you?
I think it worked very well because especially today, we're talking about a very different time then, but today people want to know, then and today, want to know that you mean what you say, and it gives them such confidence and such security when they know that. And the people who worked for me treasured it, because I would say to them, you don't ever have to question what I think, because I will always tell you. And there's safety in that. And I think the challenge with it is finding a way to do it. You don't have to lie to do it. You simply do a measured response to many things by saying, I think this, and I don't think I'm going to comment on that right now because I don't think it's going to do what I want it to do.
So not fake it while you make it.
That's right.
So this title, Global Group President, what did that mean? What were you responsible for?
Global Group President meant that I was responsible for 5 brands, and that was the total global business of those 5 brands.
Why don't you name the brands? Because these
sure
are brands that we all know and use.
We should have started by what's in your purse, right? Each one of us would have had, I think we might have covered all the brands, but let's hear what they are.
Clinique was always the largest. I love it. It's an amazing brand. Aveda, Origins. Darphin would be one that you may not have heard so much about because it's a French brand. It's headquartered in France, and it wasn't globalized. It's still not globalized too widely now at this point. Sorry, and then Lab Series for men.
And what did you have to do with these brands?
Everything from the research, product development, marketing, financial plan, strategy, soup to nuts, all of it.
So when you were working for Estée Lauder, what was the company's net worth? Not to the dollar. I mean, I'm just wondering how big it was.
Well, I think the last year I was there, we're talking billion. So I think it was somewhere in that 12 to 14
The reason
billion.
I'm saying this is, as we're having this discussion, think this company made by a woman, right, selling to women, $12 billion or something. It doesn't have to
And
be
it's
exact.
It's much bigger now.
It is.
Yes,
it is.
much bigger
I mean,
now.
that's the point.
Right. This was a really big job.
Yeah.
And you've told me that you think of mentoring as a verb. So I'm going to ask you to mentor the women who may be listening to this about what they need to do to make it to this kind of position. So let's start with, basically, if you forgive me for this, how to get there without being a bitch.
Well,
Or thought of that way, whether you are or aren't.
We're going to make an assessment. You do not fill
No, you
that
do
word.
not.
You are pleasant. You have still have the Midwestern way. So how does one do that?
I think that I had a wonderful. I was a boss at one point in my life, and I'll tell you where the transition happened. It happened when I went from being an account executive to regional marketing director in North Carolina. And he sat down with me and he said, "You are making a transition." And he said, "When you were account executive, you were as good as what you could do yourself." He said, "That will be the last time in your life you have a job like that. You're going into one where your performance will be judged based on how you can inspire others to perform and how you can inspire others to be good at their jobs." I have never forgotten that. It was a wonderful piece of advice.
Very true. Not just in business, but in everything.
Everywhere.
Yeah.
Everywhere.
Right.
Did you need to have sharp elbows?
You always do, somewhere along the way. And probably someone will listen to this podcast who may have felt my sharp elbows before. But what I always used to try to do when we were in that situation is to separate the performance of the person from the person and talk about the task at hand that was not done properly or that needed improvement or that needed something else. So in other words, a little bit like middle school. Jack, I like you, but we need to make a little bit of a change in the way we're doing this over here. And it makes a huge difference in people when you say, this task we can improve. If I start talking to you about improving yourself, and here's what I want you to do, or here's what you didn't do, people internalize that.
Sure.
They feel terrible.
Take it personally.
Yeah.
What about just sharp elbows with what would be your competition? People on the rise like you. What would they say about you?
Oh, competition inside the organization. Well, I think you would get a spectrum of what people would say. I don't think you're going to get all kind words. I think you'll say, boy, I saw her when she was really tough in that situation. If you're not going to be tough in situations, get out of the kitchen. You're going to have to be. It's how you're tough. So I think you get a spectrum. I don't think you get all good. I don't think you get all bad.
How would you handle, or did you handle, self-promotion? Because that's become very important.
The victory lap.
Take a victory lap and let people know.
I think you depersonalize that as much as you can when it's self-promotion. And you find the right network and you find the right time. So you can't walk into a meeting and say, "Guess I'm this, this, and this." Where's the right time? Plan it, schedule it, and then I feel like it should be substantive. So it is, here's what I've done, and here's why I did it, and I want you to know. And some superiors will relate to that and react, and some won't.
Well, I imagine it was largely borne out in the numbers. I mean, there are reports. That is a very unsexy side of business. And you mentioned a P&L early on. We've had guests that I've asked, did you evaluate your profit and loss to decide how the business was doing? And some know what that is and some don't. But in that industry, for a big company, you need to know. So we talked about role models, but what about someone you admired? Was there a person that you saw in the business world that you said to yourself, I would like to be like that? And was it a man or a woman?